This is the story of Arthur Vance, a man in his late 60s, a billionaire who had built an empire from nothing but hard work and a sharp mind. He had sprawling homes, sailed on private yachts, and could have anything money could buy. But all that wealth meant very little to him compared to his greatest treasure and his greatest worry, his 12-year-old son, Leo. After his first beloved wife passed away, Arthur had tried to find love again, marrying 5 more times over the years. He thought he had been a good husband, and he hoped he had chosen good women. But one day, a cold fear for his son's future forced him to do something drastic. He gathered his 5 ex-wives and made them an offer that would reveal their true hearts. He presented them with a choice so stark, so revealing, that he thought he was prepared for any outcome. He was wrong. The answer they gave him didn't just disappoint him, it froze his blood and made him question everything he thought he knew about the people he had once let into his life. I'm going to tell you exactly how it all happened. Arthur Vance was not born into money. He grew up in a small, humble town, the son of a factory worker and a school teacher. He learned the value of $1 early on, and more importantly, the value of a person's character. He was a quiet, thoughtful man, even as a boy. He worked his way through college, started a small tech company in his garage, and through decades of tireless effort and smart decisions, he built it into a global powerhouse. But he never forgot where he came from. He didn't carry himself like a man of immense wealth. He wore simple suits, drove an older, comfortable car, and preferred a quiet evening at home to a lavish party. His greatest happiness had been his first wife, Eleanor. She was his childhood sweetheart, a kind and gentle soul who had been with him through the lean years and the prosperous ones. They were true partners. Life was complete when their son Leo was born, but their joy was shadowed by a deep sadness when Eleanor fell ill and passed away just a few years later. Arthur was left a widower, a heartbroken man with a young son to raise alone. Leo was the center of Arthur's world. The boy was born with autism. He did not speak in sentences like other children, but he communicated in his own way. He would hum beautiful, complex melodies when he was happy, and he would line up his collection of small, colorful toy cars in perfectly straight rows when he needed to feel calm. He saw the world differently, noticing details others missed, the way the light filtered through the leaves of a tree, or the specific pattern on a butterfly's wing. Arthur's love for his son was boundless. He learned Leo's world, celebrated his unique gifts, and protected him fiercely. He wasn't a father who saw a problem to be fixed. He was a father who saw a beautiful, one-of-a-kind son who deserved all the love and security in the world. As Leo grew, so did Arthur's worry. What would happen to this gentle, vulnerable boy when he was no longer around to protect him? This question was a constant, heavy weight on his heart. It was this fear, this deep parental love, that led him to try and build a new family, not just for himself, but for Leo. Over the next 2 decades, Arthur married 5 more times. He wasn't a foolish man, but he was a lonely one, and he was hopeful. He longed for a partner to share his life with, and he desperately wanted to find a woman who would be a kind and loving mother to Leo. Each time, he thought he had found that person. Each time, he was mistaken. His first marriage after Eleanor was to Cynthia. She was a poised and elegant woman who seemed at first to understand his situation. She said all the right things about wanting to be a mother to Leo, but her patience was thin. She grew frustrated with Leo's routines and his silence. She saw him not as a child to be loved, but as an inconvenience that disrupted her vision of a perfect family life. The marriage ended after only 3 years. Next came Beatrice. She was a socialite, drawn to Arthur's wealth and status. She loved hosting grand parties and being seen at all the right events. To her, Leo was practically invisible. She never spoke to him, never tried to engage with him. He was simply a part of the household staff's responsibilities. Arthur saw the cold, indifference in her eyes whenever she looked at his son, and he knew he had made another mistake. Then there was Genevieve, an academic who viewed Leo as a fascinating case study. She read every book on autism and brought in a constant stream of specialists, not to help Leo, but to try and mold him into something he wasn't. She spoke about him in clinical, detached terms, as if he were a puzzle to be solved, rather than a boy to be cherished. Her approach was clinical and cold, devoid of the warmth and affection a child needs. The fourth was Isabella, a woman 30 years younger than Arthur. She was vibrant and full of life, but her focus was entirely on herself. She wanted to travel, to shop, to live a life of excitement. A child, especially one with special needs, did not fit into her plans. She made no secret of her annoyance when Leo's needs interfered with her desires. Finally, there was Margaret, his most recent ex-wife. She was the most deceptive of all. On the surface, she was perfect. She was kind to Leo, remembered his favorite foods, and even learned the names of all his colorful toy cars. She played the part of the caring stepmother so well that for a while Arthur allowed himself to hope. But over time, he saw the cracks in her performance. He would catch a flicker of irritation in her eyes when she thought he wasn't looking, or hear a sharp, impatient tone in her voice when she spoke to Leo's caregivers. It was all an act, a carefully constructed performance for his benefit. These 5 women were now his ex-wives. He remained civil with them, providing them all with generous financial settlements. They still attended the occasional holiday gathering, mostly out of a sense of obligation and a desire to remain connected to his fortune. At these events, they would put on their best faces, smiling politely and making small talk. But Arthur had started to see beyond the polite smiles. He saw the calculating looks, the way they sized each other up, the undercurrent of greed that seemed to connect them all, and it was this growing realization that chilled him to the bone and led him to make a fateful decision. The moment of clarity came on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Arthur had been to his doctor for a routine checkup and received some sobering news. His heart wasn't as strong as it used to be. The doctor wasn't sounding an immediate alarm, but he spoke in serious tones about the importance of getting his affairs in order. The words echoed in Arthur's mind all the way home. Affairs in order. For him, that meant only one thing: ensuring Leo's future. For the rest of his life, his son would need care, patience, and above all, love. Money could pay for caregivers and a comfortable home, but it could not buy love. It could not buy a family. That evening, as he sat with Leo, watching him meticulously arrange his cars on the living room rug, a profound sense of urgency washed over Arthur. He looked at his son's innocent face, so full of trust, and he knew he could not leave his future to chance. He couldn't trust that the generous provisions in his will would be enough to guarantee that one of his ex-wives would step up and care for Leo with genuine affection. He feared they would take the money and place Leo in the finest, most expensive institution, where he would be safe and comfortable, but ultimately alone. The thought was unbearable. He had to know the truth. He had to know what was truly in their hearts, stripped of all pretense and politeness. The next day he called his longtime lawyer and friend, Samuel Davies. He explained his plan, his voice heavy with a mixture of determination and dread. Samuel, a wise and cautious man, tried to dissuade him. "Arthur, you're putting yourself through a great deal of potential pain," he warned. "Are you sure you want to know the answer?" "I have to know, Samuel," Arthur replied, his voice firm. "I cannot rest until I know Leo will be loved, not just provided for." And so the letters were sent. Formal, legal letters summoning each of his 5 ex-wives, Cynthia, Beatrice, Genevieve, Isabella, and Margaret, to a private meeting at Samuel Davies's prestigious law firm. The letters were vague, stating only that Mr. Vance wished to discuss an important matter regarding his estate. The day of the meeting was grey and overcast, the sky matching the mood in Arthur's heart. He sat at one end of a long, polished mahogany table in the firm's conference room. Samuel sat beside him, a stack of documents neatly placed before him. One by one, the women arrived. They greeted Arthur with varying degrees of warmth, from Cynthia's cool nod to Margaret's practiced, concerned smile. They were dressed in their finest clothes, their faces a mixture of curiosity and undisguised anticipation. They all believed they were there to be told about an increase in their inheritance. When all five were seated, an uncomfortable silence filled the room. Arthur took a deep breath, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet space. He looked at each of them, his gaze lingering for a moment on each face he had once known so intimately. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "I have gathered you here today to discuss the future, my future, and more importantly, Leo's future." He explained in simple terms his recent doctor's visit and his pressing need to secure his son's well-being. He spoke of his deep love for Leo, of the boy's gentle nature and his special needs. The women listened, their expressions carefully neutral, their eyes betraying nothing but a calculating stillness. Then Arthur laid out the choice. "I have amended my will," he said, his eyes scanning their faces, "and I am presenting each of you with two options. You must choose one. Your choice is final and will be legally binding." "Samuel," Davies slid 5 identical folders across the table. "Option A," Arthur continued, his voice dropping slightly, "is a significant inheritance. Each of you who chooses this option will receive a one-time tax-free payment of $50 million. You will be free to live the rest of your lives in absolute luxury. However, by accepting this, you will also sign a legal document relinquishing any and all future connection to Leo. You will have no rights, no responsibilities, and no contact with him ever again." A collective, sharp intake of breath went around the table. $50 million. The sum hung in the air, a dazzling, almost unimaginable figure. Arthur could see the greed flicker in their eyes. He let the weight of that offer sink in before he presented the alternative. "Option B," he said, his voice now softer, filled with a desperate hope, "is different. If you choose this option, you will not receive the $50 million. Instead, a trust of $5 million will be established for you to ensure your comfort, and you will be named Leo's legal guardian upon my passing. You will be entrusted with his care, his happiness, his life. You will be responsible for ensuring he is loved and protected. You will be his mother." The room was utterly silent. The choice was laid bare: an immense fortune, or the responsibility of caring for his autistic son. Money or love. He had deliberately made the financial gap between the two. Options enormous, a true test of their character. He watched their faces, searching for a flicker of compassion, a hint of maternal instinct, a sign that one of them remembered the family they once tried to be. But he saw nothing. He saw no sadness for his health, no concern for Leo's future. He only saw the cold, hard gears of calculation turning behind their eyes. They exchanged subtle glances, a silent communication passing between them that excluded him completely. He felt a cold dread begin to creep into his heart, a terrifying premonition of what was to come. He had asked the question. He had set the test. Now, all he could do was wait for the answer that he knew, with a sickening certainty, was about to change everything. The moment the last of the 5 women had walked out of the conference room, a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight descended upon Arthur. He didn't move. He simply sat at the head of the long, empty table, staring at the 5 untouched folders that held the 2 futures he had offered. One path offered love and responsibility, the other immense wealth and detachment. He had hoped with all his heart that at least one of them would choose the path of love. He had prayed that beneath the years of polite distance and subtle greed, a flicker of the woman he once thought he knew would emerge. But their cold, calculating expressions had given him no such comfort. His lawyer and friend, Samuel Davies, gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Arthur," he said softly, his voice full of concern. "Are you all right?" Arthur didn't look at him. He felt a coldness spreading through his veins, a deep, internal chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. It was the feeling of a terrible truth settling into his bones. "I asked the question, Samuel," he said, his voice a low, hollow whisper, and their silence was the answer. The drive home was a blur. The familiar streets of the city he had helped build seemed foreign and grey. Every grand building, every bustling intersection seemed to mock him, reminding him of a world he had conquered on the outside while failing so profoundly in his own home. He had been a master of business, a man known for his sharp instincts and his ability to read people. How then had he been so blind? How had he chosen, not once, but 5 times, women who were so utterly incapable of genuine compassion? When he walked through the front door of his large, quiet house, he was met by Maria, Leo's longtime caregiver. She was a kind, middle-aged woman with a warm smile, and she had more love for his son in her little finger than all 5 of his ex-wives had combined. "Mr. Vance," she said gently, "Leo has been asking for you." He finished his new puzzle. Arthur forced a smile, a painful stretching of muscles that felt unused. "Thank you, Maria. I'll go see him." He found Leo in the sunroom, sitting on the floor, his colourful toy cars arranged in a perfect, shimmering line from one end of the room to the other. When Leo saw him, his face lit up, and he let out a soft, melodic hum, his unique way of saying he was happy. Arthur's heart ached with a love so fierce it was almost painful. He knelt on the floor beside his son, his billion-dollar empire forgotten, his devastating meeting a world away. Here, on the floor with Leo, was the only thing that mattered. He ran a hand through his son's soft hair, and the boy leaned into his touch. In that moment, the weight of his fear was crushing. He had built a fortress of wealth to protect this boy, but he was beginning to realize that the greatest dangers were not from the outside world, but from the very people he had invited inside. That night, sleep would not come. He lay in his bed, staring into the darkness, and the faces of his ex-wives paraded through his mind. He remembered Cynthia's initial promises to be a wonderful mother, Beatrice's dazzling smile at high society parties, Genevieve's intelligent debates, Isabella's youthful energy, and Margaret's convincing performance of affection. Had it all been a lie from the very beginning? Had he been nothing more to them than a bank account, a stepping stone to a life of ease? The thought was a deep, personal humiliation. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the years of his life, the hope he had invested, the trust he had offered so freely, only to have it prove worthless. He felt like a fool, an old naive fool who had let his loneliness and his desperate hope for a family cloud his judgment. He wept silently in the dark, not for himself, but for his son, who deserved so much more than the cold indifference he had just witnessed. For 3 days, there was nothing but silence. None of the women called, none of them sent a message. Arthur understood that they were conferring, planning, strategizing. The thought of them all gathered together, their heads bent in a shared conspiracy of greed, was more repulsive to him than anything he could have imagined. They were not 5 separate individuals anymore. They had become a single entity, a 5-headed monster united by the scent of his fortune. On the 4th day, the answer he had been dreading finally arrived. It didn't come in the form of 5 separate decisions. It came as a single, thick envelope delivered by a courier. It was from a law firm he didn't recognize. A high-powered, aggressive firm known for its ruthless tactics. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside was a letter, not from any of his ex-wives, but from a lawyer writing on behalf of all 5 of them. The letter was a masterpiece of cold, corporate cruelty. It stated in stark legal terms that all 5 women, Cynthia, Beatrice, Genevieve, Isabella and Margaret, had unanimously chosen option A. They would all be taking the $50 million. But it didn't stop there. The letter went on to justify their decision in the most insulting way possible. It claimed that after careful and heartfelt consideration for Leo's well-being, they had collectively concluded that he would be better served in a specialized professional care facility rather than in the home of a single guardian. They painted their greed as an act of selfless concern. They suggested that the emotional turmoil of being raised by a stepmother would be detrimental to a child like Leo. They were twisting their own cold-hearted choice into an accusation against him, implying that his desire to give Leo a mother was somehow selfish and misguided. Reading those words, Arthur felt the last of his sorrow burn away, replaced by a slow-burning, icy rage. The audacity of it, the sheer hypocrisy was staggering. They didn't just want his money, they wanted to strip him of his dignity as a father, to absolve themselves of their own moral failure by pretending it was for his son's own good. The letter was a declaration of war. It was their final, definitive statement that his son, his beautiful, gentle Leo, was worth nothing to them beyond the price tag he had placed on their indifference. The news hit him harder than any failed business deal or market crash ever could. This was a bankruptcy of the soul. He started to retreat into himself. He would spend hours in his study, not working, but simply staring out the window. The joy he once found in his work now seemed hollow. He would go through the motions of his day, attending meetings and speaking with his staff, but his mind was elsewhere. He was replaying his life, searching for the red flags he must have missed, the moments of deception that now seemed so obvious in hindsight. He felt a profound sense of isolation. His vast wealth had built walls around him, and he now realized those walls had kept out not only his enemies, but also any chance of finding true, honest, human connection. The world he had built felt like a house of cards. His past was a lie, and his future was a terrifying unknown. Every smile from a business associate, every compliment from an acquaintance, now felt suspect. If the women he had shared his home and his life with could be so duplicitous, how could he trust anyone? The suffering was quiet, but it was deep. It was the pain of a man who looks at the tapestry of his life and realizes that most of the threads are rotten. There was a night, about a week after the letter arrived, that Arthur hit his lowest point. Leo was asleep upstairs, and the house was silent except for the ticking of a grandfather clock in the hall. Arthur sat alone in his vast, dimly lit living room, a glass of expensive whiskey untouched on the table beside him. The room was filled with priceless art and luxurious furniture, but it felt as empty and cold as a tomb. He was surrounded by the trappings of success, yet he had never felt like more of a failure. For a terrifying moment, he allowed the women's poisonous suggestion to take root in his mind. Maybe they are right, a dark voice whispered. Maybe a professional institution is the only answer. Who am I to think I can protect him forever? Who will love him when I'm gone? The thought of Leo living out his days in even the most luxurious facility, surrounded by paid staff but without the warmth of a family, without love, broke his heart. It felt like a surrender, a betrayal of everything he stood for as a father. The despair was a physical thing, a crushing weight on his chest that made it hard to breathe. He felt old, tired, and utterly defeated. Just as he was about to let that despair consume him, the phone rang. He ignored it, but it rang again, persistent. With a heavy sigh, he answered. It was Samuel. "I'm coming over," Samuel said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Don't tell me you're fine, Arthur. I've known you for 40 years. Can hear it in your voice." Half an hour later, his old friend was sitting across from him. Samuel didn't offer empty reassurances. He simply listened as Arthur poured out his heart, his pain, his humiliation, his crushing fear for Leo. When Arthur finished, his voice raw with emotion, Samuel looked at him with a clear, steady gaze. "You're looking at this all wrong," he said quietly. "You see this as your failure. I see it as their final, pathetic testament to their own emptiness. You tried to find love for your son. You opened your heart again and again, hoping to find a person of character. Is that a failing? No. It's the mark of a good father. They are the ones who failed a basic test of human decency. Their choice has nothing to do with your worth, and it has everything to do with their lack of it." Samuel leaned forward. "So they took the money. Let them. You have something they will never understand. You have love. Now stop mourning the people they never were, and start thinking about what you're going to do next. You are Arthur Vance. You don't let bullies and thieves win, not in the boardroom, and certainly not in your own family." Samuel's words were like a splash of cold, clear water. They cut through the fog of despair. After his friend left, Arthur walked slowly up the stairs and stood in the doorway of Leo's room. His son was sleeping peacefully, a small toy car still clutched in his hand. The moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating his innocent face. Arthur watched the gentle rise and fall of his son's chest, and a powerful resolve began to harden within him. His suffering had been deep, but his love was deeper. His disappointment had been vast, but his determination was vaster. The women had made their choice. They had shown him who they were. They thought this was the end of the story, that they had won. But Arthur knew in that quiet moment, watching his sleeping son, that this was not the end. It was the beginning of his true fight. His pain was not a sign of defeat. It was the fuel he would use to build a real, unshakable fortress of protection and love around his son, one that no amount of money or greed could ever penetrate. The morning after Samuel's visit, Arthur woke up feeling like a different man. The heavy fog of despair had lifted, replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. For days, he had been drowning in the past, replaying his mistakes and wallowing in his pain. But as he stood in the shower, the hot water washing over him, he realized he had been focusing on the wrong thing. He had been mourning the loss of a family he never truly had. He had been hurt by the betrayal of women who were never worthy of his trust. Now it was time to stop looking backward and start looking forward. It was time to act. The final push came from an unexpected source. He was having breakfast when Maria, Leo's caregiver, came into the dining room. She looked hesitant, which was unusual for her. "Mr. Vance," she began, wringing her hands slightly, "I hope you don't mind me saying something." "Of course not, Maria." "Please," he said, putting down his newspaper. "It's about Leo," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I know something has been troubling you this past week, and I've noticed a change in him too. He's quieter. He senses your sadness, sir. Children like Leo, they are like finely tuned instruments. They feel everything." She paused, then looked him directly in the eye. "Whatever is wrong, he needs you to be strong. He needs his father." Her simple, honest words struck him with the force of a physical blow. In his own suffering, he hadn't fully realized the effect it was having on his son. He had been so consumed by the betrayal that he had allowed it to cast a shadow over their home, a shadow that Leo could feel. That was the one thing he could not permit. The greed and callousness of his ex-wives would not be allowed to touch his son, not even indirectly. In that instant, his decision was made. It was no longer just about his own hurt feelings or his wounded pride. It was about protecting Leo's happiness and his peace of mind. He would not let them win. He would not let their toxic choice poison his home. He looked at Maria, a newfound strength in his eyes. "You are absolutely right, Maria. Thank you." He excused himself from the table, walked directly into his study, and picked up The phone. He didn't call his lawyer this time. He called his head of security, a sharp and discreet man named Thompson, who had been with his company for over 20 years. "Thompson," he said, his voice hard as steel. "I have a job for you, a personal matter. I want you to begin a thorough but quiet investigation into 5 individuals: Cynthia Lowell, Beatrice Croft, Genevieve Adler, Isabella Rossi, and Margaret Fletcher." He spelled out each name carefully. "I want to know everything: their financial situations, their social circles, their business dealings, everything. I want to know what they are doing with their newfound wealth, and I want you to be very, very quiet about it. No one can know this is coming from me." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "Understood, Mr. Vance," Thompson said, his tone professional and unquestioning. Arthur hung up the phone. The fight had begun. He felt a surge of energy he hadn't felt in years. Old Arthur, the man who built an empire from scratch, was back, and he was going to protect his son. Thompson was incredibly efficient. Within 2 weeks, the first reports began to trickle in. They were delivered in plain manila envelopes, with no return address, left discreetly on his desk. As Arthur read through the initial findings, a dark and ugly picture began to take shape. The women had not just taken the money and quietly disappeared into lives of luxury. They were using it, flaunting it, and in some cases behaving in ways that were not just greedy, but deeply reckless and cruel. Cynthia, the elegant and poised one, had apparently used a large portion of her $50 million to launch a hostile takeover of a charitable foundation, one that had been started by her own late father. The foundation was dedicated to helping underprivileged children. Cynthia was systematically dismantling its programs, planning to rebrand it as a high society vanity project, a patronage of the arts that would serve only to elevate her own social standing. She was destroying her father's legacy of kindness for the sake of her own ego. Beatrice, the socialite, had embarked on a whirlwind of ostentatious spending. She bought a massive yacht, a private jet, and threw lavish parties that were the talk of the town. But Thompson's report included a darker detail. She had completely cut off her own aging mother, who lived in a modest retirement home. Private investigator noted that Beatrice hadn't visited or even called her mother since receiving the inheritance, despite the old woman's failing health and repeated pleas from the nursing staff. She was so consumed by her new wealth that she had abandoned her own family. Genevieve, the academic, had used her money to establish a research institute. At first, this sounded noble, but the truth was sickening. The institute's sole purpose was to promote a series of radical, unproven, and potentially harmful treatments for autistic children. She was using her wealth and academic credentials to lend credibility to dangerous theories, preying on the desperation of vulnerable parents. She was exploiting children like Leo for profit and prestige. Isabella, the youngest, had fallen in with a dangerous crowd. She was bankrolling the lavish lifestyle of a charismatic but shady entrepreneur who was known to have ties to organized crime. She was burning through the money at an alarming rate, caught up in a world of high-stakes gambling and risky illegal investments. Her $50 million was not a ticket to a better life. It was a fast track to self-destruction. But it was the report on Margaret, the one who had pretended to care the most, that truly turned Arthur's stomach. Margaret had always spoken of her dream to open a small, charming animal shelter. It was a story she had told him often, a sign of her supposed compassionate nature. And she had, indeed, bought a large property. But she wasn't building a shelter. Thompson's report included photographs. She had bulldozed the beautiful wooded property to the ground and was in the process of building a monstrous, gaudy mansion, a tasteless monument to her own greed. The final, damning detail was a transcript of a recorded phone call, legally obtained, in which Margaret was laughing with a friend about how she had fooled the old man with her silly little sob stories about wanting to save puppies. Arthur sat in his study, the reports spread out before him like evidence in a criminal trial. Each page revealed a new layer of moral decay. They weren't just greedy, they were destructive, cruel, and selfish to their very cores. This was not just about them choosing money over his son, this was about their fundamental character, or lack thereof. They were using the money he had given them not to build better lives, but to inflict harm, abandon their families, and feed their own insatiable egos. He felt no sadness now, only a cold, hard certainty. He had not just made a mistake in marrying these women, he had invited poison into his life. And he now saw that simply cutting them off was not enough. They had shown him who they were, and now he had to show them the consequences of their choices. Arthur knew he couldn't fight them in a messy public battle. That would only create a scandal that could hurt Leo. His response had to be quiet, precise, and devastating. He needed to hit them where they were most vulnerable, their money and their reputations. He had spent his life building a network of powerful and influential people, and now he would use that network not to build, but to carefully dismantle. He started with Cynthia. Arthur made a quiet, anonymous donation, a very large one, to the board of her late father's charitable foundation. With it, he sent a package containing detailed evidence of Cynthia's plans to gut the foundation, along with a proposal from a respected non-profit management team on how to not only save the foundation, but to expand its work. He empowered the board members who still believed in the original mission to fight back against her. He gave them the weapons they needed to protect her father's legacy from her greed. For Beatrice, his approach was more personal. He contacted a well-known investigative journalist, a woman famous for her exposés on the hypocrisy of the super-rich. He provided her, again anonymously, with the details of Beatrice's lavish spending, juxtaposed with the heartbreaking story of her abandoned mother. He gave the journalist the name of the retirement home and the contact information for a few disgruntled former staff members. He knew a story of a millionaire socialite neglecting her dying mother would be irresistible. He was not just exposing her, he was using the power of public shame to hold her accountable. Genevieve's case required a different tactic. Arthur used his connections in the academic and medical worlds to fund a comprehensive, independent study by a team of leading autism experts. Their mission was to publicly and scientifically debunk the dangerous theories Genevieve's institute was promoting. He would fight her pseudoscience with real science, her lies with undeniable truth, protecting countless vulnerable families in the process. Dealing with Isabella was a matter of simple financial pressure. Arthur made a few discreet calls to his contacts in the banking and finance industries. He passed along information about the shady character she was involved with. Suddenly, Isabella's lines of credit were frozen, her investments were scrutinized, and the entrepreneur she was funding found himself under federal investigation. Her world of easy money and consequence-free living was about to come crashing down. Finally, there was Margaret. Arthur saw her ostentatious mansion as a symbol of her deception. He learned that she had cut several legal corners to get the building permits approved quickly. He hired a team of environmental lawyers to review her construction plans. They quickly found that her project was a clear violation of several local conservation laws, threatening a protected wetland area on the edge of her property. He funded a local citizens group to file a lawsuit, bringing her monstrous project to a grinding halt and trapping her in a legal quagmire that would cost her a fortune to fight. He did all of this with the precision of a master chess player, moving his pieces quietly across the board. He never showed his hand. To the world, these were all separate, unrelated events. But Arthur knew he was the invisible force behind it all. He felt no guilt. This was not revenge. This was justice. They had made a choice based on pure, unadulterated greed. They had shown a complete lack of humanity, and he was simply going to show them that actions and choices have consequences. He had feared them, he had suffered because of them, but now he was taking back control. 6 months had passed since Arthur had set his plans in motion. It was a cold, crisp autumn day. The leaves on the trees outside his study window were turning brilliant shades of red and gold, a beautiful and final display before the harshness of winter. For Arthur, it felt symbolic. The consequences he had quietly orchestrated were now in full bloom, and the winter for his ex-wives was about to set in. One by one, their carefully constructed worlds were beginning to crumble. Cynthia was locked in a bitter and humiliating legal battle with the board of her father's foundation, portrayed in the press as a greedy daughter trying to desecrate her family's legacy. Beatrice had become a social pariah after a scathing article exposed her as the millionaire who abandoned her own mother. Genevieve's institute was discredited, facing lawsuits from parents whose children had been subjected to her harmful therapies. Isabella was nearly bankrupt, her criminal boyfriend had fled the country, and she was being investigated as an accomplice. And Margaret's monstrous mansion was a half-finished shell, mired in endless legal delays and bleeding her dry with lawyer fees and fines. They were all desperate, and in their desperation they did exactly what Arthur knew they would do. They turned on each other, each blaming the others for their predicament, convinced it was some elaborate curse or a collective streak of bad luck. But finally, a sliver of the truth must have dawned on them, because one morning Arthur received a single terse email. It was from Margaret, but it was signed by all 5 of them. They demanded a meeting. They were no longer asking politely. Arthur agreed. He instructed them to meet him not at a lawyer's office, but in the one place that would make his message crystal clear, the large, formal living room of his own home. It was the room where they had all, at different times, played the part of a happy family. It was a room full of ghosts and lies, and it was the perfect stage for the final act. On the appointed day, he felt a calm he hadn't experienced in years. He wasn't nervous, he was resolved. He woke up early, had a quiet breakfast with Leo, and spent some time with him in the garden, watching him trace the patterns on the fallen leaves. His son's peaceful presence was a reminder of why he was doing this. This wasn't about vengeance, it was about protecting this peace, this innocence. As the time for the meeting approached, he had Maria take Leo to the park with his security detail, ensuring his son would be far away from the toxic energy that was about to enter their home. Arthur then stood by the large window overlooking the circular driveway, watching as 5 separate luxury cars pulled up, one after the other. The women emerged looking tired, angry, and defeated. Their expensive clothes and jewelry seemed out of place, like costumes on actors who had forgotten their lines. They were no longer the confident, calculating figures from the lawyer's office. They were 5 desperate people on the verge of losing everything. Arthur took a slow, deep breath. The conversation was about to begin. They filed into the living room and sat stiffly on the sofas, avoiding eye contact with each other and with him. The air was thick with resentment and unspoken accusations. Arthur remained standing, positioning himself by the fireplace, a silent and commanding presence in his own home. Cynthia, always the most direct, was the first to speak. Her voice was sharp, brittle with anger. "Arthur, we know you're behind this," she snapped. "The foundation, the press, the legal troubles, it's all too coincidental. You're trying to ruin us." "Ruin you?" Arthur responded, his voice dangerously quiet, calm and controlled. "No, Cynthia, I am not ruining you. You are simply experiencing the consequences of your own choices. I just made sure those consequences arrived a little sooner." Beatrice, her face pale and drawn, let out a bitter laugh. "Consequences? For what? For taking the money you offered us? It was a business deal, Arthur. We made a choice." "Yes, you did," Arthur agreed, his gaze sweeping over each of them. "You made a choice, and I want you to understand exactly what. That choice was. You think you chose $50 million, but that's not what you chose. You were given a test of character, a simple question. Is a human life, the life of a vulnerable child, worth more or less than a sum of money? And all 5 of you, unanimously, decided that a child's life was worth less. He began to walk slowly around the room, his voice never rising, yet every word landed with the force of a hammer blow. You, Cynthia, he said, stopping in front of her. You chose money over a child, and then you tried to use that money to destroy your own father's legacy of helping other children. You didn't just fail my test, you failed his. He moved to Beatrice. You chose money, and in doing so, you showed the world that not even your own mother was worth your time or compassion. You bought a yacht while she sat alone in a nursing home. You broadcast your own heartlessness to the world. I just made sure the right people were watching. His eyes fell on Genevieve, who stared at the floor. And you took the money and used it to build an institute based on lies, preying on the fears of parents just like me. You chose to profit from the suffering of children. There is a special kind of evil in that, Genevieve. I simply chose to fight your lies with the truth. He turned to Isabella, who was visibly trembling. You chose a life of reckless indulgence with a criminal. You thought the money made you untouchable. You learned that it only made you a bigger target. Finally, he stood before Margaret, the woman whose betrayal had cut the deepest. And you, Margaret, he said, his voice laced with a cold disappointment, you were the most skilled liar of them all. You faked compassion, you faked affection, all for this. You bulldozed a forest to build a monument to your own greed. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? He returned to his position by the fireplace. The room was deathly quiet. The women were stunned into silence, their anger replaced by the dawning, horrified realization of how completely he had outmaneuvered them. You came here today to demand that I stop, Arthur said, his voice resolute. But I will not. This is not a negotiation. This is a lesson in accountability. However, I will offer you a way out, a new choice. He gestured to a small table where his lawyer, Samuel, who had entered the room silently a few moments earlier, was now placing 5 new documents. Those are contracts, Arthur explained. You will each return 45 of the $50 million you received. You will keep $5 million, the amount offered in option B, a generous severance for your greed. The returned funds, a total of $225 million, will be placed into a new charitable trust. It will be called the Leo Vance Foundation for Children with Special Needs. Its mission will be to support families and fund research, real, compassionate research. You will sign over the money, and in return, the legal pressures, the media scrutiny, and the financial investigations will all cease. You will be free to disappear with your $5 million and live your lives in quiet obscurity. If you refuse, he added, his voice dropping to an icy whisper, I will use the full extent of my resources to ensure that every last one of you ends up with nothing. I will see to it personally. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The last vestiges of their defiance evaporated, replaced by raw primal fear. They looked at the contracts on the table as if they were death sentences. But they also looked at Arthur and saw in his eyes not anger, but an unbreakable resolve. They knew he was not bluffing. They had underestimated him completely. They had seen him as a lonely old man, a soft target, a walking wallet. They now saw him for what he was, a titan of industry who had turned all of his formidable power, intellect, and resources toward a single goal, their complete and utter defeat. There was no discussion, no negotiation. One by one, their shoulders slumped. Margaret was the first to break. A single ragged sob escaped her lips. She walked to the table, picked up a pen with a shaking hand, and signed the document. Her signature was a messy scrawl, the final act of a broken woman. Isabella followed, her face a mask of terror. Then Genevieve, her academic arrogance shattered. Cynthia signed with a look of pure hatred in her eyes, but she signed nonetheless. Beatrice was the last. She stared at Arthur for a long moment, a flicker of something unreadable in her expression. Was it regret, or just the bitterness of a gambler who had lost her final hand? She signed the contract and pushed it away from her as if it were contaminated. When the last signature was on the page, Samuel quietly gathered the documents. The deal was done. Arthur looked at the 5 defeated women. He felt no triumph, no joy, only a profound and weary sense of closure. "You may leave now," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "My driver will see you out." They rose and left the room without another word, a procession of ghosts exorcised from his home. Arthur stood by the window and watched as their cars pulled away one last time, disappearing down the long driveway until they were gone for good. The house was quiet again. The battle was over. He had not just won, he had transformed their toxic greed into a force for good. He had taken the money they chose over his son and used it to build a legacy of hope in his son's name. The air in the room already felt lighter, cleaner. The long, painful chapter was finally closed, and for the first time in a very long time, Arthur felt a genuine sense of peace. In the days immediately following that final, tense meeting, a profound quiet settled over Arthur's life. It wasn't an empty or lonely quiet. It was a peaceful, cleansing silence. The constant weight of worry and the simmering anger he had carried for months had finally lifted. It was as if a long and painful storm had passed, leaving behind clean air and a clear sky. There were no more threatening letters, no more frantic calls from lawyers, no more discreetly delivered envelopes from his security chief. The 5 women, true to the terms of their surrender, vanished from his life as completely as if they had never existed. They took their $5 million and retreated into the obscurity he had promised them, their grand ambitions and lavish lifestyles reduced to a quiet and likely bitter footnote. Arthur wasted no time in making good on his own promise. He worked closely with Samuel to establish the Leo Vance Foundation for Children with Special Needs. He poured his own energy and resources into it, ensuring it was more than just a name on a trust fund. He assembled a board of compassionate experts, doctors, therapists, and educators who genuinely cared about making a difference. The $225 million reclaimed from his ex-wives became the seed of something truly wonderful. It funded new schools, sponsored groundbreaking research, and provided grants to families who couldn't afford the specialized care their children needed. Arthur found a new purpose in this work. He was no longer just building a business empire. He was building a legacy of hope, all in his son's name. It was a beautiful act of alchemy, transforming the ugliest parts of his past into the brightest parts of his future. He made a conscious effort to change the atmosphere in his home as well. He had the formal living room, the stage for that final confrontation, completely redecorated. The heavy, dark furniture was replaced with lighter, more comfortable pieces. The room was filled with plants and photographs of Leo. Leo as a baby, Leo on his first day of school, Leo laughing in the garden. He wanted to erase the last lingering shadows of the past and fill his home with nothing but love and happy memories. It was a symbolic act, but a powerful one. He was reclaiming his space, both physically and emotionally. Several years have passed since that day. Arthur is now in his early 70s. The health scare that started everything turned out to be a manageable condition, and with the stress of his past life gone, he feels healthier and more energetic than he has in decades. He has stepped back from the day-to-day operations of his company, choosing to dedicate the majority of his time to 2 things: his son and his foundation. His relationship with Leo has blossomed in a way he never could have imagined. Without the constant tension and the presence of people who didn't understand or accept his son, Leo has become more relaxed, more expressive. He still doesn't speak in full sentences, But his world of communication has expanded. He learned to use a tablet to type out his thoughts, revealing a witty, intelligent and observant mind that had been hidden from the world for so long. He and Arthur spend their afternoons together, not as a billionaire and his dependent son, but simply as a father and child who adore each other. They work on puzzles, listen to music, and take long, quiet walks in the garden. Arthur learned that the greatest wealth he possessed was not in his bank accounts, but in these simple, shared moments of connection. The Leo Vance Foundation has become a major force for good in the special needs community. It is known for its integrity, its compassion, and its tangible results. Arthur often visits the schools and centers the foundation supports. He doesn't go as a wealthy benefactor, but as a grateful father. He meets other parents and hears their stories, sharing in their struggles and their triumphs. He sees the faces of the children being helped. Children, just like Leo, and he knows that he made the right choice. The money that was once a symbol of greed and betrayal is now a symbol of hope and healing for thousands of families. He never remarried. He realized that the family he had been so desperately searching for was right in front of him all along. It was a small family, just him and Leo, supported by a few loyal and loving people like Maria and Samuel, and it was more than enough. He found a sense of peace and contentment in that realization that had eluded him through 5 marriages. He was no longer lonely because his life was filled with a love that was real, unconditional, and true. Looking back, Arthur sees the entire painful ordeal as a necessary, if brutal, lesson. He learned that a person's true character is not revealed in what they say, but in the choices they make when they think no one is watching or when they believe they have all the power. He had been fooled by words, by appearances, by carefully constructed performances. The test he devised, as painful as it was, stripped all of that away and revealed the simple, unvarnished truth of who those women were. He learned a hard lesson about trust and wealth. He realized that his immense fortune acted as a distorting lens, making it nearly impossible for him to see people clearly. It attracted those who were skilled at deception, who saw him not as a man, but as an opportunity. He learned to be more cautious, not with a cynical heart, but with a wiser one. His circle of friends is smaller now, but it is made of solid gold. He values loyalty, integrity, and kindness above all else. Most importantly, he learned about the true nature of strength. He once thought his strength lay in his ability to build a business, to dominate a boardroom, to amass a fortune. Now he knows that real strength lies in vulnerability, in the fierce, protective love of a father for his son. His greatest victory was not in defeating his ex-wives in a battle of wits and resources, but in his unwavering commitment to his son's well-being. He learned that protecting a child's heart is a far greater accomplishment than building a global empire. He would tell anyone facing a similar situation that you must trust your instincts, fight for those you love, and never, ever let the greed of others define your worth or the worth of your family. In the end, this is not a story about the vindictiveness of 5 greedy women. It is a story about the enduring power of a father's love. Arthur Vance set out to find a mother for his son, but in the process, he discovered that he was all the parent his son ever truly needed. He learned that family is not always defined by blood or by marriage certificates, but by unwavering loyalty, unconditional acceptance, and selfless love. The world may see him as a billionaire who won a bitter war against his ex-wives. But Arthur knows the truth. The real victory was not in the money he reclaimed, but in the peace he found. It was in the smile on his son's face, in the quiet hum of his happiness, and in the knowledge that he had built a true legacy, not of skyscrapers and stock portfolios, but of kindness, compassion, and a love that could never be bought or sold. He had faced the worst of human nature and answered it with the best of his own, proving that a loving heart will always be the most valuable asset of all.